And the paper I'd like to share with you, as I mentioned before, is now a classic paper, has a wonderful title, which is A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. Now that sounds almost like a news article or a news article about a scientific paper, but that's actually the title of the scientific paper, which was published in the journal Science, which is one of the 3 apex journals. Scientific publishing is competitive, but it's especially competitive to get manuscripts accepted into Science, into Nature, and into the journal Cell. So it represents kind of one of the kind of Super Bowl, NBA championships, and Stanley Cup, if you will, for you sports aficionados of scientific publishing. This is a paper from Matthew Killingsworth and Dan Gilbert. It was published in 2010, but it's still considered a classic. And this paper, A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind, has a number of very important points. I'm going to paraphrase certain elements of it for you because they say essentially what I would like you to know far better than I could say. So first of all, they start out with a statement, which is, unlike other animals, human beings spend a lot of time thinking about what is not going on around them. Contemplating events that happened in the past, might happen in the future, or will never happen at all. Now, their point is still a very good one, which is that humans have this wandering of the mind that they call stimulus-independent thought. That is, there's nothing happening to create these thoughts or anything happening in the immediate environment. These thoughts are just happening on their own internally. That's the default mode network. This study was important. In fact, it was a landmark study because they did it right about the time that smartphones became widely available and in use. So again, 2010. So they basically pinged people. They contacted people on their iPhones many times per day. And they did this for well over 2,200 adults. They had a mix of male and female people in this study. The mean age was 34 years, but there was a range, mean, of course, being average, but there were a range of different ages and so forth. And at any moment, they asked people, what are you feeling right now? And they also asked them, what are you doing right now? So they were looking for the match or mismatch between what people were doing and what they were feeling. They were essentially trying to probe what people were thinking about. And they also addressed that. And they came up with a kind of a bubble chart, if you will, where the bigger the bubble, the more answers came back about one particular thing. And they assessed whether or not people were happy or not in that moment, or sad or not, whether or not they were focused on what they were doing or not. There are a lot of bubbles in this chart, so I'm not going to read them all. But the important points that came from the data, and again, there's a very large data set, was that, and here again I'm paraphrasing, first, people's minds wandered frequently regardless of what they were doing. In nearly half of the samples taken, people were generally thinking about something else, except it turns out there's just one little bubble sitting way far out on the horizon here. People claimed, and I'm inclined to believe them, that they tend to be very focused on making love if they were making love in the moment where they were pinged on their iPhone. Now, why their iPhone was there with them at that moment, I don't know. That's wasn't included in this description of the study. But all the other activities, grooming and self-care, listening to the news, watching television, relaxing, working, et cetera, during all those activities, people claim that their mind wandered a lot. And then they also assessed, of course, their mood and how those people felt at any given moment, depending on what they were doing and how well their mind and their emotions matched what they were doing. And what they say here is, second, they revealed that people were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were not. And this was true during all activities. And then third, what people were thinking at a given moment was far better a predictor of their happiness than what they were doing. So this is interesting, and I think matches a lot of people's experience. In fact, I think as you hear about this study, many of you will probably just say, well, duh. I mean, if you're working and you don't like your work and you're thinking about something bad that happened, well, then of course you're not going to be happy. But the key point of this study is that it did not necessarily have to be the case that people were thinking about something unpleasant. In fact, if people were working and they were thinking about something else that was pleasant, that also made them feel unhappy. In other words, the mismatch between being in an activity and having our mind elsewhere led people to report themselves as feeling more unhappy in that moment. And when you total this up, what you find is that people are often not present to what they are doing, and that is a great source of unhappiness, even if their thoughts are those of happy, joyful thoughts. So this is interesting, and I think runs counter to what most of us have heard or have been taught, which is, think good thoughts, try and suppress bad thoughts, have a good internal landscape, create a good narrative. That is all true. But equally, if not more important, is to have the ability to be fully engaged in what you are doing at a given moment. That is the strongest predictor of being happy. And there were several other studies that followed up on this, but their conclusion that they put in the final short paragraph of this paper, I think really captures it beautifully. They say, and here I'm quoting directly, in conclusion, a human mind is a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The ability to think about what is not happening in a moment, I added the in a moment part, is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost.